Hello my friends and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as J-Monster, and you are watching episode 4 of Caesar in Gaul. And last time around we were talking about the invasion of the German tribes over the Rhine into Gaul, who were led by Ariovistus, a great German chieftain, and the effect that their reputation for prowess and bravery in battle was having upon Caesar's troops. Now, Caesar's troops, after talking to local Gallic merchants in the area, had discovered that from the Gauls, in any case, that the Germans were reputed to be massive, hulking brutes with huge, superhuman strength, and who were completely invincible in battle and just superhumanly brave. And this is, of course, old wives' tales, but it spreads among the Roman troops and begins to frighten most of them, who were terrified. And actually, at one point, the officers of some of the legions declared to Caesar that even if Caesar ordered them out for battle, that the legions were not sure to comply, which is insubordination at its worst. My God, that's every general's nightmare. So, upon observing this state of affairs, Caesar summons the centurions of every grade to a council and begins by severely reprimanding each and every one of them for their sissiness. Not Caesar's words. That's a little bit of ad-lib, but you get the idea. And he reminds them that at the time of his consulship, he says, Ariovistus had sought the friendship of Rome with great eagerness, and what reason was there for thinking that he would so lightheartedly refuse to carry out his obligations? Which is an interesting statement because, as I understand it, Caesar sought the friendship of Ariovistus, or sought to at least sway him over to the side of the Romans in order to prevent a German invasion into Gaul for some years. Because this is, I believe at this point Caesar actually realizes that civil war is going to happen back home. So the last thing he needs is a massive German invasion over the Rhine during the time of his consulship, especially near the end of his consulship. And it wasn't so much, I imagine Ariovistus was inclined to be the be declared friend of the Roman people, not for the prestige that it offered him from being a friend of Rome, but rather because they probably bribed the shit out of him. So, something to consider. Now, he says that because Ariovistus had sought this friendship with Rome, what reason was there for thinking that he would so lightheartedly refuse to carry out his obligations to the Roman people? For his own part, he was convinced that when the king was acquainted with his demands and saw the fairness of the terms proposed, that is to say, when he realized that Caesar had showed up with an army of probably about 5 to 6 legions, that maybe he would change his mind and, abandon his stubborn ways. If, however, Caesar says, a mad impulse should lead him to make war, what reason had they for all being so afraid? Both their own courage and his careful attention to his duties gave good grounds for confidence, which is fair enough. Caesar has proved himself on many, many occasions to be a very competent general. He says, our countrymen faced this enemy, he continued, in our father's time, when Gaius Marius, yes, there's the same Gaius Marius who contended with Sulla for power during his consulship, and who was a great friend of Caesar's family and was responsible for the Roman military reforms that are named after him, the Marian reforms, which abolished the old manipular system. But anyway, Gaius Marius won a victory over the Cimbri and the Teutoni, by which, as all agreed, the whole army earned as much glory as its commander. By which I can only assume means booty, because who fights for glory, really, when there's much loot to be had? I imagine lots of people do, but loot being a consideration. They faced them again more recently in Italy, where they defeated the rebellious slaves under Spartacus. Spartacus had... if you've seen the TV show, there is actually some historically accurate stuff in there about Spartacus receiving help from a number of Germans. And he says that these rebellious slaves are aided to some extent by military training and discipline that they had acquired from their Roman masters. This shows what a great advantage resolute courage is. For a long time, the Romans had an unreasoning fear of the slaves while they were still armed, yet afterwards defeated them when they were not only armed, but trained and flushed with victory. Moreover, these Germans are the same men whom the Helvetii have often met in battle, not only in Switzerland, but also in Germany, and have generally been Yet the Helvetii were not a match for our army. Fair enough, Caesar, fair enough. If anyone is alarmed by the fact that the Germans have defeated the Gauls and put them to flight, he should inquire into the circumstances of that defeat. He says he will find that it happened at a time when the Gauls were exhausted by a long war. Ariovistus had remained for many months under the cover of his camp in the surrounding marshes, or that was surrounded by marshes, not Martians, so that they had no chance of fighting him, and then he attacked very suddenly, when in despair of bringing him to battle, the Gauls had broken up and scattered into groups. Thus his victory resulted from his cunning strategy rather than the bravery of his troops. The employment of such strategy was possible against inexperienced natives, but even Ariovistus can have no hope of being able to trick our armies by such means. He went on to say that those who tried to disguise their cowardice by pretending to be anxious about the corn supply or the difficulties of the route were acting presumptuously. It was plain that they either lacked confidence in their general sense of duty or else meant to dictate to him. He was attending to these matters. Corn was being supplied by the Sequani, the Lucii, and the Lingones, as well as the Aedui, I believe, and the harvest was already ripe in the fields. And as to the route, they would soon be in a position to judge for themselves. The suggestion that the men would not obey orders to advance did not trouble him at all, for he knew that in all cases in which an army had refused obedience, it was either because their generals had been unsuccessful and were regarded as unlucky, or because they were proved dishonest by the discovery of some misconduct. His own integrity was attested by his whole life, his power of commanding success by the campaign against the Helvetii. Therefore he was going to do that very night what he had at first intended to defer until later. He would move camp in the early hours of the morning so as to find out with the least possible delay whether their sense of honor and duty, was stronger than their fear. If no one else would follow him, he would go all the same, accompanied by only the 10th Legion. Of its loyalty he had no doubt, and it should serve as his bodyguard. Caesar places very high confidence in this legion for its bravery, and shows it particular favor. This address had a dramatic effect on all ranks and inspired them with the utmost enthusiasm and eagerness for action. First of all, the men of the 10th, being duly flattered by Caesar, commissioned their military tribunes to thank Caesar for his high opinion of them, and to assure him that they were ready to take to the field at any moment. Then the other legions prevailed upon their tribunes and first-grade centurions to make their peace with him, professing that they had never entertained doubts or fears, never imagined blah 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 blah, that they could lose, and that Caesar didn't know what he was doing. They're kissing ass at this point. Accepting their excuses, Caesar tells Dibiacus the Aeduan, who is present among the army, to study the available routes because he trusted him more than any of the other Gauls, and was advised by him to make a detour of some 50 miles, which would enable them to march through open country. Starting in the small hours, as he had said he would, he marched without interruption for 6 days. Wow. Wow. I'm sure they rested sometimes. It wasn't without interruption. But anyway, it is worth mentioning that the Romans were very, very good. Caesar and his army in this campaign were very, very good at surprising enemies by the speed with which they could cover great distances. But hearing that Caesar had moved nearer to his camp, Ariovistus sent a message saying that he had no objection to arranging the interview previously requested, as he thought that he could now do so without any risk. Caesar did not reject his offer, thinking that Ariovistus was coming to his senses again, since he undertook of his own accord to do what he had refused to do before when asked. That is to say, he thinks that Ariovistus has realized that there is a very large Roman army on its way to kick his teeth in, and he should probably comply, because maybe he didn't think that Caesar had the guts to go outside of the province, or that Caesar would be politically or legally able to go outside of his jurisdiction to attack him. But there you go. That was a very big mistake, apparently. But yes, he hoped that the recollection of the great favors that the king had received from himself and the Roman government would make him abandon their stubborn attitude when he heard what was required of him. The interview was staged for the 5th day following, and in the meantime messengers kept going to and fro between the two camps with regular correspondence. Ariovistus insisted that Caesar should not bring any infantry to the conference. He was afraid, he said, of being caught in a trap. And that is an interesting request, because the Germans actually at this point have a tactic of riding their cavalry hard into battle and then dismounting, which basically gives them the mobility of cavalry as well as the staying power of infantry. Additionally, the Germans had another tactic whereby a cavalryman would pick a very swift infantryman from among the rest of the German army who would accompany him into battle and support him if he was unhorsed or something, or in danger or that sort of thing. So, very clever move by Ariovistus right there. You gotta hand it to him. He didn't become a very successful, powerful king of the German tribes for no reason, obviously. As Caesar did not want to give Ariovistus an excuse to cancel the meeting, he dared not entrust his safety to the Gallic cavalry. He decided that his best course would be to take away all their horses and mount upon them infantrymen of the 10th Legion. And this is where the infantry of the 10th, or the 10th Legion, gets its name of equestris. It's not because they were all trained in cavalry tactics and that sort of thing and rode horses, but just kind of as a bit of a joke. And on that note, one of Caesar's infantrymen remarks that Caesar is better than his word. He promised to make the 10th his bodyguard, but now he's knighting them. So, very, very clever. So there's an extensive plain on which they meet up, where there stood a very high mound of earth, about equidistant from the camps of Caesar and Ariovistus. So, yeah, about in the middle between their two camps. And this plain is located in what I believe is now modern-day Alsace, because it's the site of the battle as well. The battle of I believe it's the Vosges, Bosges, and yeah, it's reasonably close to the Rhine, but you'll see why that's important afterwards. So, Caesar agreed to hold their conference at this large mound in the middle of their two camps. And the mounted legion that Caesar had brought with him was posted some 300 yards away from the mound, and Ariovistus' horsemen took up their position at an equal distance. The king stipulated that they should confer on horseback, each accompanied by 10 men. On reaching the place, Caesar began by recalling the favors that he and the Senate had conferred on Ariovistus, how he had been honored with the titles of king and friend, and how he had received handsome presents, see bribery, pointing out that very few princes had been granted such distinctions, which were usually reserved for those who had rendered important services to Rome. So obviously it was important enough to Caesar to see this through and to bribe the shit out of this guy. So, reasons for that. He said to Ariovistus, "You would have no right to apply to the Senate for any such favors. You owe them entirely to my kindness and my generosity and that of the Senate. Friendship between my country and the Aedui is of long standing and founded on solid grounds. Resolutions of the Senate, expressed in most complimentary terms, have repeatedly been passed in their honor. They held a position of supremacy in Gaul all along, even before they sought our friendship. And since it has always been our policy to see that our allies and friends, far from losing anything that they already had, should have their credit, honor, and importance increased, how then can we allow them to be robbed of what they already had when they became our friends?" He repeats the demands in which he had instructed his envoys to present to Ariovistus earlier, that Ariovistus should not make war on the Aedui and their allies, and that he should restore their hostages, and even if he could not send any of the Germans back home, he should at least prevent any others from crossing the Rhine, which would basically make Ariovistus look like a lapdog to Caesar, for one, and would probably lose him a lot of respect amongst his tribesmen, or end up causing actual armed conflict between himself and the German tribes that want to cross over into Gaul, if indeed they are as determined to do so as Caesar stipulated that they were earlier. So, Ariovistus has little to say in reply to these demands, but speaks at length about his own merits. He had crossed the Rhine, he said, not of his own accord, but in response to the invitation of the Gauls, and it had needed the prospect of rich reward to induce him to leave his home and his relatives. The possessions he had in Gaul had been ceded to him by the Gauls themselves, and the hostages had been given voluntarily. As for the tribute he exacted, this was customarily regarded as the right of a victorious belligerent. He had not been the aggressor, he says. The Gauls had attacked him, all their tribes having marched out and taken the field against him. He had completely routed their entire force in a single battle. If they wanted to try their luck again, he was quite ready for another fight. If they wanted peace, it was unfair for them to object to the tribute that they had hitherto paid without demur. The friendship of the Roman people ought to be a distinction and protection to him, not an occasion of loss, and it was this expectation that he had sought it. If, through Roman interference, his subjects were absolved from payment and withdrawn from his control, he would be just as ready to discard that friendship as he had been to seek it. The large number of Germans he was bringing into Gaul were brought to secure his safety, not for aggression. Bullshit. The proof of that was that he had not come till he was asked, and fought only in self-defense. However, he had come there before the Romans, whose armies had never before marched beyond the frontier of the province. What did Caesar mean by invading his dominions? And it goes on like that. And then he actually threatens Caesar. He says that, "I suspect that this talk of friendship with the Aedui is just so much pretense, and that your object in keeping an army in Gaul is to crush me. Unless you take yourself from this country and your army with you, it won't be as friend that I shall treat you. In fact, if I killed you, there are plenty of nobles and politicians in Rome who would thank me for it. I know this because they have themselves commissioned their agents to tell me." Wow. Big words, Ariovistus, big words. And I can make them all my grateful friends by putting an end to you. But if you will go away and leave me undisturbed in possession of Gaul, important there, not just possession of his territory, but possession of Gaul, which basically is saying, get the hell out of here, Romans. This is my territory, piss off. He says, "I will reward you handsomely, and whenever you want a war fought, I will see the job through for you without your lifting a finger or running any risk." Caesar explains at some length why he could not think of abandoning his intention. It was contrary to his principles and that of the Roman government to desert a loyal ally, and he could not admit that Gaul belonged to Ariovistus any more than the Romans. Blah de blah de blah, and while they're going back and forth in this exchange, word was brought to Caesar that Ariovistus' horsemen were approaching nearer to the mound, riding towards their soldiers and throwing stones and javelins at them. Caesar breaks off the conversation, went to his men, and forbade them to throw a single missile in retaliation. For although he knew that a legion of picked troops could engage cavalry without the slightest risk, he did not choose to give anyone the chance of saying, if the enemy were driven off, that he had broken his word by treacherously attacking them during a parley. Which is probably also a little bit of a stab at the Germans there, because they are, in fact, attacking them during a parley. When the news spread through the ranks of the army that Ariovistus had arrogantly warned the Romans off of the whole of Gaul, and that his cavalry had interrupted the conference by attacking Roman troops, the men's enthusiasm and eagerness for battle knew no bounds. Now, from this point on, or actually after this, Ariovistus sends envoys to Caesar saying that he must, or that if he wished to resume their interrupted discussion, and he would be willing to do so, and to ask him either to appoint a day for another personal interview, or if he did not want to do that, to send an officer to represent him. Caesar did not see anything that was to be gained by a further interview, especially on the previous day, as Ariovistus had been unable to restrain his soldiers from attacking Roman troops. He thought it would just be running a great risk to send a Roman officer into putting the Roman officer at the mercy of the savage Germans, which after they've attacked you, fair enough, right? Obviously, he can't keep his troops from rushing forward and slaughtering Caesar and the few men that he has to guard him. So it's a smart idea. And Caesar decides to send in his stead a young man named Gaius Valerius Procillus, a young man of high character and liberal education who was fluent in the Gallic language, and whose father, Gaius Valerius Caburus, had been granted Roman citizenship by Gaius Valerius Flaccus, which I assume means he's been adopted. I mean, he's taking the clan name of Valerius. So, according to our discussion on Roman naming conventions, that would seem to be the case. But as soon as Ariovistus sees Gaius Valerius Procillus and the other man, Marcus Matius, who is bound to Ariovistus by ties of hospitality, as soon as he sees them at his camp, he asks them, "What are you coming here for? To play the spy, I suppose?" And when they attempted to speak to him, he stopped them and had them put in chains. And for the next few days, Caesar spends his time parading his troops in front of the German camps, or the German camp offering them battle. And he learns, because there's constant cavalry skirmishes and that sort of thing. He learns from... Ariovistus at one point sends a detachment to attack Caesar's camp, and there's a very hotly contested battle that was kept up until the evening. At sunset, with severe casualties having been sustained on both sides, Ariovistus retires. On inquiring from prisoners why they would not fight a general engagement, Caesar was told that the German matrons who used to draw lots and employ other methods of divination to decide whether or not it was advisable to join battle, had pronounced that the Germans were not destined to win a battle if they fought before the new moon. And I believe moons are a monthly cycle, so before basically next month. The next day, leaving adequate garrisons in the two camps, Caesar posts all of his auxiliaries in front of the camp, where they would be visible to the enemy and give an impression of strength, since his regular infantry were numerically weak in comparison with that of the Germans. When he draws his legions up for action in 3 lines, and he draws his legion up for action in 3 lines and advances right up to Ariovistus' camp. The enemy was now compelled to lead his forces out, because the Romans are right there, and they would be besieged in their camp otherwise, where all of their women and children and all that and goods are. And Ariovistus draws up the various tribal contingents at equal intervals, these being the Harudes, the Marcomanni, the Triboci, the Vangiones, the Nemetes, the Udusi, and the Suebi, who you will recognize from this battle, as we are, in fact, fighting a large horde of Suebi led by Ariovistus. But Caesar places one of his 5 generals at the head of each of his legion and details his quaestor to command the remaining legion, so that every soldier might know that there was a high officer in a position of authority to observe the courage with which he conducted himself, and then leads the right wing first into action, because he had noticed that the enemy's line was the weakest on that side. Caesar's troops would attack with such vigor when the signal was given that the enemy also dashed forward so suddenly and swiftly that there was no time to throw any spears. So the men dropped their spears and fought hand to hand with their swords, quickly adopting their usual phalanx formation. Pardon me. The Germans were able to withstand the sword thrusts of the Roman infantry, but many of their soldiers actually threw themselves onto the wall of German shields confronting them, wrenched the shields out of the enemy's hands, and stabbed them from above, which it sounds interesting. I would be interested to see how exactly that plays out. And in this way, the German left is routed, but the right begins to press Roman troops hard by weight of numbers. Their perilous position attracted the attention of young Publius Crassus, who was in charge of the cavalry and better able to move about and see what was happening than those in the fighting line. He therefore sends up the 3rd line to the relief of the Roman. It would be the Roman right. Yes. No. Left. Yes, and this move turns the tide of battle once more in the favor of the Romans, and the enemy's whole army begins to break and flee without stopping until they come to the Rhine, some 15 miles away. Very few of the strongest try to swim the river, and a few others save themselves by finding boats, including Ariovistus himself, who had the luck to come across a small craft moored by the bank of the Rhine. All the rest of the Germans, however, were hunted down and killed by the Gallic auxiliary cavalry. Ariovistus' 2 wives both perished in this flight, one a Suebic woman, whom he had brought from Germany, and the other a Norican woman, who King Wocchio had sent to him while he was in Gaul. So apparently the Germans practiced polygamy. That's interesting. And Gaius Valerius Procillus was being dragged along with another number of other captives by German fugitives when Caesar had come up on him himself, because Caesar was with the cavalry in their charge to run down the fleeing Germans. This fortunate chance pleases Caesar apparently so much that it pleases him as much as the actual victory. For the man whom it rescued from the enemy's clutches and restored to him was the worthiest in the whole province, besides being his own friend and host. And his death, which Providence thus averted, would have marred the pleasure and rejoicing that attended so splendid a triumph. Procillus recounted to Caesar how, before his very eyes, the Germans had 3 times cast lots to decide whether he should be burnt to death at once or reserved for execution later, and he owed his life to the way the lots had fallen. Which is interesting. Statistically, you'd think that would be very unlikely. It could just be bit of a fantastic story or an embellishment. I'm curious of what the implications of that would be. It could be that obviously that fate is on the side of the Romans in this particular conflict, or that's the gods themselves that favored the Romans in this battle. But who knows? Maybe he just got really, really lucky. It's entirely possible. But yes, he recounts this to Caesar, and Matius, who also was found among the prisoners being carted away by the Germans, was brought back to Caesar. Whew! Friend saved. Although you think if he really cared about them all that much, he probably wouldn't have sent them into the mercy of a bunch of hostile people that had already attacked his troops during a parley, but sure. Anyway, when the news of this great German defeat reaches the other side of the river, or the Rhine, the Suebi, who had advanced as far as the riverbank, turned back homewards, and the Rhineland tribes, seeing what a panic they were in, pursued and killed a large number of them. Opportunistic. I'm actually prepared to believe that. Caesar had completed, because the Suebi were a very large and oppressive and warlike German tribe, so I could believe that, seeing them in disarray, that other tribes around there would take advantage of that. But yes, the Rhineland tribes, seeing what a panic they were in, pursue and kill a large number of them. Caesar had completed 2 important campaigns in a single summer. He now took the army into wintered quarters in the territory of the Sequani, somewhat earlier than the usual time of year, and leaving Labinius in command, started for northern Italy to hold the assizes. So that is the end of Ariovistus. And afterwards, you can actually see Ariovistus right there, running away. And afterwards, we're going to be talking about the Belgic tribes, who, as you recall, live quite close to the Rhine and are in constant conflict with the Germans. And they're a very powerful, numerous, and martial people. And Caesar begins his campaign against them after... I'll give you a bit of a preview of what's going to go on. I won't go into too much detail, but he realizes that they are planning a rebellion in 57 BC, and he takes action against them. So yes, that is the end of the episode. We're going to see the end of the battle here, as we're going to run down Ariovistus. Although unfortunately, after we rout these guys, as you can see, there are no German forces left on the field that can oppose us. At least none that are visible. After this, there was a bit of a bug, unfortunately, and I searched for like half an hour. I ended up almost being late for class trying to find whatever German troops were hidden out there in the forest, and I simply couldn't find them. We capture and kill Ariovistus here, but upon not being able to find the German troops, I have to quit the battle, and unfortunately I lose this entire army, this victorious, now fairly veteran army. We lose them completely. They all die. So we suffer a defeat there, but we start rebuilding an army pretty much immediately in true Roman style. We take our lumps and we just keep throwing in more men to die. So unfortunately, despite having destroyed this army of Ariovistus here, who's fleeing like he did in the actual Battle of the Vosges, we actually end up losing, and we lose the army. But Caesar comes back and he avenges the fall of his comrades. As you can see here, yes, they are dead. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in episode 5. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.